Mr. Kovac.
I didn't ask you to bring me back into this world.
All I ask of you is that you solve a murder.
Whose?
Mine.
Altered Carbon is the latest big-budget Netflix original to hit our streams. And as GameSpot Universe's resident dystopian sci-fi fan, I binged the lot in a worryingly short amount of time, but now I'm here to tell you why you need to get on Altered Carbon faster than a hyperspatial needlecast. That'll make sense once you've seen this video. While you're here, subscribe. We're gonna have a ton more coming for Altered Carbon because it seriously is that good. Based on the 2002 novel by Richard K. Morgan, Altered Carbon takes place in a futuristic dystopia where human consciousnesses can be downloaded onto a stack, a kind of memory stick that can be ejected from one body and inserted into another. These bodies are called sleeves, and while immortality is technically within reach for many people, most choose not to grasp it, as new sleeves are eye-wateringly expensive. The mega-rich can afford to re-sleeve themselves into clones, living for hundreds of years if they want to. But the longer they live, the more wealth and power they accumulate, and the more detached from the rest of humanity they become. They fear nothing and no one, until Lawrence Bancroft, one of the richest men on the 7 settled worlds, is murdered. Sort of. Like all responsible tech owners, he backs up his data to the cloud, but he loses those last crucial 48 hours, which means the identity of his murderer remains a mystery. To find his killer, Bancroft calls up a man who he believes can solve the case, Takeshi Kovacs, an elite soldier who has been on ice for 250 years. But Kovacs has woken up in a brand new sleeve, into a society that he was actually fighting to prevent, a world reshaped around his own failure. Believing that death is an integral part of being human, as a member of the militia group the Envoys, Kovacs fought against this new ruling class of meths. Fun fact, the term meth comes from the biblical figure Methuselah, who reportedly lived to be over 900 years old. But of course, it's far from an open and shut case. Working with Lieutenant Kristen Ortega, the cop originally assigned to Bancroft's case, and Vernon Elliott, a soldier whose daughter's mind is imprisoned in a VR construct, Kovacs discovers a tangled web of lies, deceit, and violence. I don't want to go too deep into the plot because it's a mystery that you'll want to uncover by yourself, but basically it's like a messed up game of Cluedo that will leave you wanting to tear your own hair out. In a good way. The world of Altered Carbon is dense, and it's some of the most hardcore sci-fi you'll see on screen. As our Mike Rougeau said in his written review, it throws so many high-level concepts at you in its first episode that you might need to take a minute just to take it all in. But honestly, if you like the heavy themes, grittiness, and moral complexity of movies like Blade Runner or anime like Ghost in the Shell, then Altered Carbon is for you. It's packed full of cool cyberpunk-themed tech like VR plug-in cafes where all of your dreams can become a reality, the neurochemical upgrades you can give to your sleeves, and there's needle casting where your consciousness can be beamed across the galaxy, hundreds of light years away, into a waiting sleeve. It's not just the tech that's super cool in Altered Carbon, the show explores society and morality through a really unique lens, one in which death isn't necessarily the end. If a stack is destroyed, then the individual dies for real, but for meths, real death is a minor inconvenience. Because they can afford clones and backups, their lives mean nothing to them. There's no threat, no fear of the end, which you could argue is what ultimately makes us human. They lose their grip on humanity and take out their boredom and superiority complex on who they perceive to be lesser beings. And because they're so rich and powerful, they can get away with murder. Often quite literally. But for some people, stacks offer a moral crisis. Catholics believe that a stack can't be a receptacle of the human soul, and that by using them, you can't reach heaven when you die. But what happens when a murder victim has religious coding that prevents them from being spun up to testify at their own trial? And even if you take all of that out of consideration, the question of identity remains. Are you still you if you're in a different body? You might be a different sex, a different age, even a different race. All of this and more is explored in Altered Carbon. The road to Altered Carbon has been a long one. A live-action adaptation of the novel has been in the works since it was first published back in 2002. Originally, it was going to be made by Warner Brothers, but as time went on, nothing ever materialized. Shutter Island and Terminator Genisys writer Laeta Kalogridis was a huge fan of the book and was determined to get it on screen. When a movie didn't pan out, she had a chance encounter with David Ellison, founder of Skydance, the production company responsible for the likes of Star Trek Into Darkness and World War Z. Together, they took an impassioned pitch to Netflix, who ordered a 10-episode run without even asking for a pilot episode. And while Netflix aren't releasing any figures on how much they've spent on the show, honestly, it looks like no expense has been spared. You remember how at the start of each season of Battlestar Galactica, there'd be huge special effect sequences, but then as the season would go on, it'd be mostly political-based bottle episodes taking place inside the Galactica and the Colonial One? Altered Carbon is the complete opposite of that. It doesn't blow its load on the opening few episodes, and instead the series is consistently delivering overwhelming sci-fi vistas and jaw-dropping set pieces throughout. In all of the dystopian sci-fi I've watched, Altered Carbon has one of the strongest aesthetics. From the sets to the costume design, everything about that world just feels like it belongs there. And there's some really great people involved in the show. I mentioned Laeta Kalogridis, who, okay, has some less than stellar movies on her IMDb page, but she also has some really bloody good ones. Also joining the writing team is Hard Candy's Brian Nelson, Fargo's Steve Blackman, and the writer of Altered Carbon himself, Richard Morgan. There's also a load of veteran directors. The season opener was helmed by Miguel Sapochnik, who you'll know as the man behind Game of Thrones' epic Battle of the Bastards. There's Nick Horan, of Sherlock and Doctor Who fame, and Alex Graves, who has directed a ton of Game of Thrones and The West Wing. And the cast has more than its fair share of familiar faces. The Killings' Joel Kinnaman and Sleeping Dogs' Will Yun Lee take the sleeves of protagonist Takeshi Kovacs. Rome's James Purefoy is electrifying as the eccentric Lawrence Bancroft, and Martha Higareda plays the badass Ortega with such ease that I'm actually a little bit afraid of her.
You know, saving your ass is not my only job.
I like her.
Basically, if you need something to fill that cyberpunk sci-fi hole left by Blade Runner 2049, then you should definitely check out Altered Carbon. We're going to be covering the hell out of the show right here on GameSpot Universe when it launches on Netflix on February 2nd, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. See you next time.